Chapter 15. Christ's not rebuking toleration and the law. Deuteronomy 13, vindicated. Christ's nowhere reproving church and state for not punishing Sadducees and heretics denying the resurrection is a poor argument to prove the lawfulness of tolerating them. First, the Sadducees were chief rulers themselves, Acts 23, verse 6, and he reproves a judge for murder. Must in that same reprove him for tolerating murderers? He that said the guide leading and the blind led should fall into the ditch, he reproved the misgovernment and wicked toleration of the rulers. Nor read we that Elias reproved Ahab for not killing Baal's priests. Ergo, Ahab transgressed not the law, Deuteronomy 13, verses 1 through 3, Deuteronomy 17, verses 1 through 3, in tolerating false teachers. Nor doth God, Deuteronomy 32, verses 6 through 8, reprove the rulers for not punishing the worshipping of the golden calf or the making of it for worship, because Aaron and the rulers under Moses were guilty of it. Will it follow that the rulers and the sons of Levi should tolerate it, since the Lord commanded the contrary? Now, does the man of God reprove Jeroboam for tolerating the people to worship the golden calves, or because he suffered the lowest of the people to intrude themselves in the priest's office against the word and law of the Lord, because the less sin was swallowed up in the greater? But it follows not that Jeroboam did the duty of a magistrate in suffering the people to go to Dan and Bethel to such abominable idolatry, or in suffering the basest of the people to take on them the priest's office. But the prophets reproving Jeroboam's commanding of that idolatrous worship, and the priests, which is a greater sin, must by consequence condemn not punishing of it, which is a lesser sin. So David sinned as a magistrate in suffering Bathsheba to commit adultery and to wrong her husband, and to violate God's law, and should not only as a magistrate have hindered her, but should have put her to death for adultery, he being the supreme magistrate, and there being an express law of God that the adulterer, man or woman, should die the death, Leviticus 20, verse 10, which David knew well. Yet the prophet Nathan does not in express terms condemn David for not putting Bathsheba to death, though he faithfully reproved David, because Nathan reproving David for the adultery in itself committed in his own person as the greater sin, must by consequence condemn David's tolerating of Bathsheba, an adulteress, to live, which was a lesser sin. And it will not follow that David, a king, should tolerate known adultery in Bathsheba, a subject, because Nathan does nowhere in direct terms, nor any scripture elsewhere that we read, condemn David for not punishing with the sword the adultery of Bathsheba. So Nathan, Gad, and other prophets nowhere reproved David sparing the life of Joab, a murderer. When Christ reproved the Sadducees for denying the resurrection, he reproves by consequence both church and state for tolerating the denying of the resurrection, and supposes the toleration of it to be against the law of God. Number 2. It is no argument at all from, first, a negative fact, secondly, in such a particular scripture to prove the lawfulness of toleration. Let them answer this. Christ, that was a faithful preacher to state and church, nowhere reproveth in the gospel the toleration of the extortion of publicans, sodomy, murder, the absolving of a murderer at a feast, a bloody toleration, denying of God, blasphemy. Ergo, it was lawful for the church and state to suffer all these. Thirdly, this answer inferreth that the church should tolerate all false doctrines in the denying of the resurrection, and that there should be no church censure, contrary to Matthew 18. And Christ does nowhere rebuke the Pharisees, scribes, and priests, because they did not, by preaching, admonish and convince their fellows, the Sadducees, of that heretical doctrine that the dead shall not rise. And by this, there should be not only a physical toleration and a non-punishing by the magistrate of all heresies, but a moral forbearing, and no rebuking, no preaching against false ways, and so not only church censures are taken away, contrary to Matthew 18, verses 15 through 17, and Revelation 2, verses 1, 2, 14, 15, 16, and 20, but it is not lawful for ministers or teachers to write or teach against Jezebel, and these that hold the doctrine of Balaam, by this reason of the libertines. Nor does Christ command the rulers of the people to punish the false witnesses that rose against him. Nor does he rebuke church or state for tolerating the publicans to extort the people, nor Caesar and Pilate for oppressing the people, nor the scribes and Pharisees for not preaching against Herod's beheading of John Baptist, or Pilate's mixing the Galileans' blood with the sacrifice, Luke 13. Ergo, ministers are to tolerate bloody magistrates and not to preach against them. The sixth answer to elude these laws is, if these laws bind us in the New Testament, then must you not add nor diminish from the law, Deuteronomy 13. And so must the whole city, inhabitants and cattle, be put to the edge of the sword, and devoted to a curse, verse 14, 15, 16, and 17, which ye cannot say bears any truth under the New Testament, except we say that papists and their babies should be put to the edge of the sword, and their houses and the land they dwell in, execrable. Answer. There are three different laws. Deuteronomy 13, one against the seducing false prophet. To verse 5, a second against any seducing person if it were brother or wife. To verse 12, a third, to the end of the chapter, of a city, state, or society that will defend a false teacher. Now we argue not from the third law, but there is no warrant to punish the son of a false prophet, idolater, heathenish, or popish, or of wife or brother that tempt us to apostasy and to follow false gods, yea, or to hurt land, house, or cattle that belongs to them. The son shall not bear the sin of the father, except God by a positive law command it. But the third law, upon which we build not our arguments, at least as touching any ceremonial part of it, belongs not much to us. For to gather the spoil of such a city, and to burn it every whit, for the Lord is a cursed and devoted thing or place, is clearly ceremonial and typical, because now every creature of God is clean, Romans 14, verse 14, and so are all the victuals or meats of heathens or papists now and good and sanctified, 1 Timothy 4, verses 3 and 4. And what God hath cleansed, we are not to esteem common or profane, Acts 10, verse 14, and the like must we say of places, 1 Timothy 2, 8, John 4, verse 21, and Zechariah 14, verse 21. And by proportion, of all creatures, the creatures cannot now be typically cursed and execrable as then, Deuteronomy 13, verses 16 and 18. For the Holy Land and every city was made by the Lord typically and ceremonially holy, and a pledge of a heaven. And therefore a seducer fled to any city from the judge. If that city should partake with him in his sin, and save him from the hand of justice, that city forfeited its typical holiness, and it, and all things in it, the spoil, cattle, and goods, made accursed, and to be burnt with fire, and all the inhabitants, young and old, put to the edge of the sword, and that, not under the notion of false teachers, but as open rebels against God, his holy law. And the judge, the minister of God, was to avenge that blasphemy, and the moral part is this. If the army now, on foot in England, will, against the laws of God and man, protect blasphemers and false teachers, and save them from the hand of justice, and will reward, countenance, and promote seducers of souls, our humble opinion is that they render themselves obnoxious to the sword of the magistrate. For the punishing of infants and burning of the spoil was a mere temporary typical law that doth not abolish us in the New Testament. Now libertines bring this as an argument. We cannot put to death false teachers by Deuteronomy 13, for then should we, by the law, kill their children and cattle, which consequence we deny as false and vain. For our divines strongly argue from the moral equity and the law of nature, warranting Joshua to make war with the Canaanites in the Old Testament, to prove the lawfulness of wars under the New Testament upon the same moral equity as Joshua 11, verses 19 and 20. Those that refused to make peace with Israel and came against Israel in battle, against those Israel might raise war by the law of nature in their own defense. But such were all the Canaanites except those of Gibeon, Joshua 11, verses 19 and 20. And this argument holds strongly in the New Testament, if any, as some Anabaptists do infer. This is no good argument, because if the major proposition were true, then should we also kill the women and sucking children, as the Lord commanded Saul touching the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 15. And then should we destroy the cattle and burn the spoil with fire, for Joshua and Israel made a war with Jericho, etc. And the rest of those cities, yea, Israel destroyed them utterly, and showed them no favor, Joshua 11, verse 20. We with good ground deny the consequence, because the war with these 7 nations was warranted by the law of nature, but the war, tali modo, to destroy utterly young and old, cattle, and all they had, was from a ceremonial and temporal law peculiar to the Jews, because God would have his church neither enriched by their goods, nor to make covenants and marriages with them, or to live in one society with them, nor to see their groves, lest they should be ensnared to follow their religion, and strange gods.